Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today I'm sitting down with Dean Mathews. He's the founder and CEO of OnTheClock, a time tracking and workforce management platform that's built specifically for small businesses. OnTheClock has been around for more than 20 years, actually 22, right, Dean? Dean has spent basically that entire time talking to a huge amount of small business owners about how they manage their people and their time within their business. So, what I want to get into today, Dean, is what you actually have learned from that over the past 22 years. Not the product stuff, but really the human stuff. What 2 decades or over 2 decades of watching small businesses run their operations can actually teach you about how owners think about time, trust, and the costs that they don't even know that they're carrying. Dean, really glad to have you here today. Was hoping you could give a quick intro of yourself, and then we can hop on into our questions today.
Absolutely, Chad. Thank you for having me. So yeah, a little bit about me. So as you said, CEO founder. I'm also product director here at OTC. So product is near and dear to my heart. I've always been a product person. Love it. So as CEO, I work with my 7 direct reports, you being one of them. We have a great, amazing time doing amazing things. We are getting a lot done this year. So I work with you guys and keep all departments moving forward. From a product standpoint, I work with Steve, and we really listen to customers. We watch the industry. We pay a little bit of attention to competitors, and we just really build the best product we can for our customers. So yeah, and we love doing it. It's the best time of my life.
Awesome. Awesome. Glad to hear that. So, before we actually hop into the questions, Dean, I've heard quite a bit about the origin story of On the Clock.
Yeah.
But could you give us just a super brief overview of how On the Clock got started, where you got the idea from, and where it went from there back in 2004, right?
Like three, actually,
Three.
was the
Okay.
very beginnings. So yeah, so I know you've heard it, so I'll try to spare you the long story, Chad. The kitchen table story. So this was like late-ish 2003. Sitting at my kitchen table. I believe it was a Friday night. That's what I did on Friday nights. Hung out on the internet. So yeah, I was reading through these forums, small business and accounting forums, and I just noticed this pattern. All these small business owners and CPAs were just looking for an online, easy and reliable online time tracking is what they wanted. So in my naive self, I just said, I'm going to build that for them. Just a little preface. So I am definitely very entrepreneurial, several businesses, also software development, a software developer. So I had the skills to build it. So
Yep.
just went ahead and built it. And within a few months had the initial version of OTC up and running. And, fast forward, like you said, 22 years. Fast forward to today, the first half of that was really more of a passion project of mine.
Yeah.
And now we are a full-fledged SaaS organization. 26 of us now, I believe. Just had a few hires.
Yeah.
And we are serving about 16,000 customers now and closing in on around 170,000 active users per month. So that's a pretty cool number.
For sure. For sure. It
Yeah,
has to have been pretty cool to see that growth over the
it
years.
has.
And
Yeah.
see how the industry has changed and how the product has changed. I'm sure it was very different when it first started than it is
It was a
today.
whole, it was a whole different game.
For sure.
But I love the evolution of it. Wouldn't have wanted, yeah, it's been amazing.
Awesome. Very cool. So, you mentioned you really got the idea reading forums of accountants talking about basically a need that they had, it sounds like. When you first started On the Clock, when you first started reading these forums, how were small businesses tracking employee time? Like, it doesn't sound like there was a digital or online version for them to do it. How were they doing it? And what does it really tell you about how they looked at time as a resource back then?
Yeah, so back then, 22 years ago, we did not have all of the SaaS solutions. You might have had some installed software bases where
Yeah.
remember get a CD in the mail or whatever and install it in servers, and that was the software side. There was a huge lift just to get that in place.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of customers or a lot of small businesses back then were just they were doing old school, the green machine, the time cards.
Yep.
clock in, clock out.
Yep.
Like I said, a few of them had software based. But I think similar to nowadays, which is an interesting parallel, is back then there were not a lot of people using actually time tracking at all. Very similar to today as well. They have these hourly employees, and they are doing it by word of mouth, by text, by phone. They're doing it in a lot of these very inefficient ways, we'll say.
Yeah.
And really, that was the original problem we set out to solve back, 20 some years ago.
It's interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking back as you're mentioning that to my first job, which was in retail, and that would have been probably 2001, 2002. So right before you founded On the Clock. And when I first started, we had that green punch clock. Like my first job in high school, we had the paper time cards. You had to punch them. It was honestly a pain in the butt. Like it was always running out of ink, or it wouldn't punch hard enough, and you'd have to write it in and get manager signatures on it. So it was a big pain back then. But then my second job, there was more of a digital time clock where you typed in your employee number, and obviously things have changed even more over the years. But now we're on applications where you have a time clock in your pocket, which is part of what On the Clock is and does.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's been cool to live through that evolution, even though I haven't lived as closely or as intimately with it maybe as you have over the past 20 years. But I've experienced it for sure, which has been cool.
Yeah, similar here. Yeah, in my youth, definitely some green machines, some handwritten, some word of mouth back in the early days, and yeah, it's definitely evolved. And I really believe it's come to a really great place for people. Like transparency, you didn't have that back 20 years ago. You just had to kind of trust your boss and trust your manager. And for the most part, people are very honest. But
yeah,
as for every 10, there's one, and sometimes you end up with that one.
Yeah. So, back to the accountant forums that you're talking about. I mean, as you were reading their conversations, what were the issues? What were they looking to solve? It sounds like they had, older school methods that might have been handwritten or an actual physical punch clock. Maybe they weren't tracking time at all. What were they looking for when you were reading these forums?
Yeah, so it actually goes back. The two keywords that I saw that they were having, they wanted easy and reliable. That was what they wanted. Keep in mind, 22 years ago, technology wasn't as reliable, internet wasn't as reliable. So the main things the main attributes that they wanted were easy and reliable. So, along with that, the primary things that they were looking for were clock in, clock out, your basic feature of a time tracking system. Things like PTO tracking, PTO requests. And that was really the core thing that they wanted, but they wanted it easy and reliable. So when I saw reliable, obviously, what that means is that, it wasn't working when they needed it to. People would show up to work and couldn't clock in, and some poor, manager had to go correct 20 time cards or 50 time cards or 100. And that's just a pain in the butt and a lot of manual work. And so those were, back then the problems were very similar, maybe just a little simpler back then. The current customer is definitely demanding and wanting more to a product. We don't want one product for every task in a business. You'll end up with 100 different products, right? So, the buyer nowadays is a little more complicated.
That makes sense. Yeah. So, to that regard, early on, were there any specific conversations that you might have had with business owners that really made you realize how much time tracking problems were costing small businesses, whether it was mistakes or errors happening or manual entry taking a lot of time? Any specific conversations that you can, reference from the early years of On the Clock?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bunch of them. One that really stands out. This was a woman I talked to. It was probably a couple years into OTC. She was actually a current customer up until a few years ago, I think. So that was a long time. But she worked in a library, and her staff of the library, I think she had like 15 or 20 people. They were just struggling to really. They were a government. It's a public library, so So they had some compliance issues that they were dealing with, and they were really struggling with their employees just recording time. And like I said, they were on that really old school, like writing down sticky notes. They were just handwritten notes, word of mouth, come up to the desk. Hey, I worked from 9 to 5 today. And so there was all these complexities of gathering time for them. And I don't remember the exact words, but the sentiment was something like, now that we're using a modern time tracking system, like O2C, of course, like I think she said she saved like 2 hours a week or something like that, which, for a busy manager or a busy leader in at a library, that's a lot of time.
It is.
So, for her, the big one was the time. She didn't have to chase down time cards.
Yeah.
So that was probably that's probably the earliest story I remember. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
That was a good one.
2 hours a week,
Yeah.
that adds up over time. If you work 40 hours a week, a typical full time, 2 hours of that is a pretty significant percentage of it that's going towards paying that person's salary. So if you can save that time, that's huge. That's huge for the
Exactly.
business.
Yes.
Not only from a just pure, we have to pay this person to do that for 2 hours, this kind of manual remedial task, but also they can't work on tasks that might be more important or that matter more than those. So
Yeah, they're spending time on they're not trivial by any means. It's
Yeah,
important to people's pay,
of course.
but things that you shouldn't be having to do manually all the time. And this was 20 years ago. So things have really changed. But yeah, why are we doing that? Why don't we take a couple hour or two and find something that will be a permanent solution for the next 5 years?
Yeah.
And take that 2 hours and turn it literally down to like 2 minutes. So
For sure.
yeah, that's
For
pretty
sure.
much what happened when she moved. So
that's impressive, from 2
Yeah.
hours to 2 minutes. That's cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned things were different then, but I hear about it all the time of companies today that are doing things that exact same way. They're using sticky notes or they're using text messages to track time. I mean, how common is that still today? Like, do you hear about that as regularly as I do?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Chad, you know our customers. I don't have the exact percentages, but it's very well into the double digits. I think one survey I saw wasn't internal, but it was like a Gartner survey or something like that.
Yeah.
They were still predicting that I think it was like 28 or almost 30% of something along those lines of small businesses, small to medium SMBs, were still tracking time with the old school, pen and paper, not even time clocks. We're talking about like written down on a piece of paper, whereas they're still using these sticky. It's just, yeah. So these things are still continuing nowadays.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And there's putting something in place that's more organized, like we already mentioned, can save you so much time. It can save you so much money. And we haven't even gotten to the accuracy problem yet, right?
Okay. Yeah, we're only on the time inefficiency right now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And if somebody is hand coding hours into a system, whatever system it may be, whether it's Excel or your payroll system, mistakes are bound to happen. Human error, it happens. We all make mistakes, and paying someone wrong, underpaying someone, overpaying someone can be an issue too for the company. That creates massive issues that can come from fines from the Department of Labor, to your employees being upset, to employee turnover. If you're consistently docking employees' hours, that's a huge issue too. So having an organized, operationalized system is massive. And I think so many companies don't even realize all of the potential problems that doing this manually can create.
Yeah, you touched on the accuracy thing there. It's the 2 to 3% is a standard for transposing data from one to another. Retyping numbers.
Yep.
And all studies still point to that as still accurate. So if you are doing any transposition of numbers, meaning copying them from one form, whether it's a sticky note to an Excel or Excel to your payroll software, whatever it might be,
Yep.
you're getting that 2 to 3% error on average. And we can double check, we can get that down to maybe 1%, but you'll never get to zero. So
Right.
whereas
Right.
if you go to an automated, modern system, you eliminate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Dean, in your past 20 plus years, we touched on this a little bit, but what do you see as the most common mistake or mistakes that small business owners make when it comes to tracking employee time? And why do you think so many of them make those same mistakes over and over?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake they make, excuse me, the biggest mistake they make is really not implementing a system. Hands down, that's the biggest
Yeah.
one. We've touched on that point a couple times, but you come in, you start a small business. I get it. We're busy business owners. We're dealing with customers. We're trying to keep staff happy. Our people happy. We're trying to keep things moving up to the right. And a lot of times, the last thing on the list is something like time tracking and payroll.
Yeah.
So we a lot of times, so I see small business looking at that as a kind of an ancillary thing that they should be dealing with, almost like a burden.
Yeah.
But the reality is that if you don't bring that system in early, you're going to have years and years of doing it the old-fashioned way, pen and paper, or using a spreadsheet, or using a green machine, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So probably the biggest mistake I would see in regards to time tracking is not bringing it in early enough. They suffer for 5 and 10 years, and finally some big event happens, like they realize one of their people is stealing from them, or even worse yet, that they've been underpaying somebody for. I've seen it. I've underpaying somebody for years, and the person never knew it. And of course, you make up for that. You pay them back, but at the same time, you've been underpaying them. What does that do for trust? Does your team member, are they thinking that you were trying to do that? You're trying to take it.
Right.
Once that happens, once that's broke, it's hard to come back. So first thing is really just not bringing in a system that really automates time tracking early enough, particularly.
Yep.
And really the best way to mitigate that is really to buckle down and not wait for the event to happen. Like, you realize that somebody stole from you, or you underpaid somebody or overpaid somebody, but just to do it early. Compliance. I mean, there's a DOL mandate for 7 years, 5 years, forget the exact number.
Okay.
But there's a DOL mandate to maintain numbers for a certain length of time. And if you don't have that, you can end up with fines and paybacks. And it's best just to get it in early.
Yeah. I was actually doing a little research on that this morning with the Department of Labor and their record keeping requirements. And the big thing that people online kept calling out is that if you don't have records, it's actually on the company, the burden of proof to say, okay, Dean worked this many hours. Here's my documentation that shows that Dean worked this many hours. We did not underpay him. If you don't have those records as a business, not only is it a fine from the Department of Labor, but you have to pay back those hours if you can't prove one way or the other. So it's on the business. It's not on the employee. 100%. It's like he said, she said, but the business is the one that has to prove the actual with documentation of time tracking. So if you don't 100%
have that, of the time, that is true.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. And I've also read some stats. We've talked about this before, but most employees, after being underpaid or paid incorrectly 2 times, will start looking for another job. Turnover is incredibly costly. I mean, we both know this.
We've had this conversation,
having to hire, find another employee. Your employees in almost any business are your most important resource. And you need to treat them right. You need to pay them correctly because that's their livelihood. And it really does matter to them, even if the company sees, payroll as like a busy work type task. That's why we're talking about being able to, automate it, optimize it, make it easier to do. So you're not spending time and not doing it manually every single month.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, the number you just pointed out, after 2 payroll errors, a person will start to look for another job. Completely understandable, right?
Yeah.
Well, what about after 1? I mean, we have broken trust at that point. If you are working for somebody and you have a suspicion that they're not paying you properly, how much effort are you going to put in? Really?
Yeah.
And even at 0, even at no pay mistakes, there's always the employee-employer trust issue.
Yeah.
That's a common thing in any business. So to even have one mistake is in my opinion, maybe not catastrophic, but
Yeah.
it's a big deal. You know.
It is. It is. And, it just it changes how people will feel about their employer, even
Mhm.
though I would be willing to bet 999 times out of 1,000 when somebody's underpaid, it's an honest mistake. It's just an
Yeah.
error. It's somebody was, you know, typing a million things at once and typed in the wrong number or added or deleted a zero from something. But to the employee, again, that's their livelihood. That's their rent that month. That's their ability to buy groceries or take care of their children. So, these errors, even though it's an easy just keystroke error to the employer, is a huge issue for many employees. So
100%. I mean, we look at, somebody that is living paycheck to paycheck,
yeah, yeah,
and that's the reality with a lot of hourly employees. Some are, and you 1 0 means, like you said, we're missing a mortgage payment or a car
yeah,
payment or a utility bill, and that's a big deal. And
exactly.
depending on the size of the company, sometimes those payroll mistakes take a while to get corrected.
Yeah,
You can't just necessarily get a supplemental check the next day. I've heard of stories where it could take up to a couple weeks, and
yeah.
it's not acceptable to me, honestly.
No, no, I hear you there. And another thing you touched on this, Dean, but I did just want to really call it out is that often these manual systems or even the honor system, because a
Yeah.
lot of very small companies just go by the honor system. They say you were scheduled for these hours, so we're going to pay you for these hours. It doesn't scale. It might work great when you're one or two employees and it's super easy to do and you know exactly when your employee walks in the morning and when they leave in the evening. But when you have 5, 10, 15, 50 employees, that gets impossible. So it's really important, like you said, to implement a system as early as possible, to not only get your employees comfortable with it, but to also be ready to scale with the system in your business as your business does scale.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, do you want your business to thrive and, succeed and grow? Well, I could guarantee 99% of small business owners want that because, if we're not growing, if we're flatlined, we don't like that as business owners, right?
Yeah,
So we want to be growing. So always have, like you just said, these systems in place early to mitigate any errors that might come up
yeah,
and get it in place early too. If you get your scheduling, time tracking, payroll, and you get everybody on these systems of transparency like we offer, and you get them on early, you get to like 20 people, and it's much more difficult to implement anything,
yeah,
much less something like time tracking that some people would consider Big Brother.
yeah,
And to your point too, starting out small, I've seen companies where they have 2 and 3 employees, and that works great. It kind of works great,
yeah.
word of mouth, no time tracking at all. But yeah, you get to like that 4 and 5 and 6, and yeah, it gets really unmanageable really quick.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Awesome. So let's move on to the next question here, Dean. We've definitely touched on this one a little bit, but maybe we can take it from a few different angles here. A
Sure.
lot of owners, they really do think of time tracking as an administrative chore. We kind of talked about this earlier. I called
Hmm.
it a little bit of a checklist item. But what is the financial reality that they're missing when they do treat it that way? How are the costs adding up when errors happen or there's issues that come into play with time tracking?
Yeah, so that's an extremely good point, Chad. A lot of times we look at bringing a system in, like time tracking or scheduling or whatever it might be, and we look at the cost of the system. And generally, these systems are just a few bucks per employee per month,
Yeah.
generally, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's less than 5 generally. And if you think about it's a cup of coffee, right?
Yep.
Um, and what I see a lot of times is they're looking at the cost of this, and they're looking at a $20, $50 bill a month, and they're thinking about the initial setup, the time that they're going to have to take to set it up, which in our minds, I think we over exaggerate things, right?
Yeah.
So we look at this new system, we're like, oh, that's going to take me weeks. But the reality is modern systems like ours are, we've done it in like 5 minutes. We did a 5 minute setup once.
Okay.
Realistically, it might take you half an hour or an hour total.
Sure.
And the cost, say, you know, $50 a month, even at that for, a
Yeah.
good amount of employees. If you contrast that to the errors, to the loss of trust, to the cost of not doing it, I don't have the numbers here in front of me. The DOL did a study a number of years back,
Mhm.
but the $50 a month that you are spending per se on time tracking, it's somewhere in the 8 to 9x range over the length of the business lifetime that you
Yeah.
are actually saving. So if you just do the math and you just look at it as not just an administrative task, but as a
Yeah.
core fundamental thing that you are, in my opinion, should be obliged as a business owner to be doing to serve your team right and to serve your business right, that the costs are almost nothing when you really boil it down.
Yeah, I actually do have some of the numbers here, Dean. I don't have that specific one, but before I read through some of these numbers that really will, I think, be eye-opening for the listeners here. Another one that you haven't touched on yet is buddy punching and what
Oh
buddy
yeah.
punching can cost a business. For those listening who might not know what that is or have not heard that term before, can you just quickly define what buddy punching actually is?
Sure. Yeah, buddy punching is exactly like it sounds. So we have two employees, they're buddies. One employee, two ways it could happen. They arrive at work on time, and their other buddy calls them and says, "Hey, will you clock me in? I'm 10 minutes out."
Yep.
And the one person clocks both people in, and of course, one person is getting paid while they're still driving to work or at home or whatever it might be. It could be the opposite too, right? So one person leaves early, then the buddy punches both of them out, later in the day. And I've seen stories where they've got whole systems worked out where there's three people and they're alternating, and yeah, it's kind of crazy. And
Yeah.
they're effectively stealing hours a week, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what buddy punching is, and it's we got to be very honest here. It's time theft, is what it is. They
Yeah.
are stealing time, which is effectively money from their employer, and that can be well, in my mind, it's criminal. But I
Yeah.
have seen some cases, some larger scale cases, that the employees were actually targeted because of this. Generally, that doesn't happen,
Okay.
but I've seen a couple targeted by law. You know what I'm saying? So that lawyers were going
Yeah.
after the employees from the company.
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen often, but that's what buddy punching is. And yeah, it's just another one of those things that really generates just really bad trust in the company. If you have one or two people doing it, guess what happens? Everybody else catches on, and they think that this is just a normal way to run the clock. And before you know it, your whole company can do it. I have seen cases, Chad, where a business owner has came to me and said that basically he found that all 15 or 16 people were effectively buddy punching each other in and out for like years.
Like a time
um,
theft ring going on.
Thousands, probably tens of thousands of hours
Yeah.
over years.
Well,
And yeah,
yeah, I mean that, and also it can really hurt morale as well. So if I'm a super honest employee and I would never do something like that, but I find out three of my colleagues are
yeah,
doing that and are making extra money that they don't deserve and essentially stealing from the business, that's going to upset me for sure and create an issue between me and my colleagues at the business because I
yeah.
don't see that as an ethical behavior. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But just to talk to some of those stats, I mean, you mentioned if they're padding their hours by 10, 15 minutes a day, or even 5 minutes, like that really adds up for businesses. There are some stats, this is from the American Payroll Association, but there's estimates that buddy punching costs U.S. employers $373 million per year. That's not a small amount of money. The study also said that this can run as high as 2% of gross annual payroll at effective companies. And just to give an example, for a business that has $500,000 in annual payroll, 2.2% is $11,000 per year. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not an insignificant amount of money for a business to spend, especially a small business that they're just essentially burning because their employees are punching in early, or using a buddy to punch them in early or punch them out late. So that's a big one. And then the flip side of that, another stat, we talked about manual keystrokes and basically underpaying your employees. Not only can that hurt your business because it could increase your turnover or affect employee morale, but actually fixing a paycheck. So having to do another pay run, spending the time to do it. Generally, with many payroll tools, there's fees to do off-cycle pay runs. On average, a payroll error correction costs $291 to correct. And it's also making whoever does your payroll, it's taking their time. So that's just something that is an unnecessary thing that companies are having to do. And then, of course, on top of that, there's fines potentially between the Department of Labor for underpaying your employees. So a big thing to watch out for a company. Really important to make sure that you're getting it right from the start.
No, 100%. Yeah, get it in early. Get your systems in early and get them, and take your time, do your selections, talk to your team. If you have a good team, they'll understand why, and get that established so we don't have these problems down the line. As business owners, we have plenty of problems and we have plenty of things. And the last problem that we want is to have team internal problems, right? As a business owner, that's one thing I look at is what can I control and what can I not control, right? Yeah. So if it's in our business, we have some control over it. We can do something about it, to put in systems of transparency, put in systems that build trust. Where we have outside forces that we can't control, the industry, competitors, customers. So let's focus on what we can control and build the best thing we can, in your house. And you would be amazed when you just go down and do these simple steps, how much benefit it can have for you.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to take it back because we did talk a lot about buddy punching and time theft. I mean, I truly believe in my heart of heart, and I think you do too, Dean, correct me if I'm wrong, but most people are honest. We're not talking 90% of your employees are regularly stealing time or buddy punching. There's a few bad eggs that can ruin things for everyone else, and it does really impact the rest of the business. So, let's talk about that elephant in the room to a certain extent. We hear this a lot when companies are thinking about implementing a formalized time tracking tool, especially if they're going from the honor system, or they have one employee who they don't need time tracking, or they don't feel they do. Mm-hmm. But there's often tension between tracking time and trusting your employees. How have you seen that tension play out, and what's your line on where that should start and end? How do you convince your team that time tracking isn't about not trusting them or trying to be big brother, that it's really about transparency, authenticity, and helping both sides there? How does a business handle that?
Yeah, so you're on a really good point. I definitely talk to business owners, managers, leaders in business. I also talk to a lot of employees of theirs as well. And one thing I notice is it tends to be that the younger people that I talk to, and I've seen other reports on this too, the late teens, the 20-year-olds, the early 30s workers, they generally don't have too big of a problem with bringing technology into their day as far as tracking time. Yeah. I think a lot of times they've grown up digital, they've grown up with the phone in their hands, their GPS is turned on for all their friends. So there's a level of transparency that younger people typically tend to have. So they typically are pretty good with it, and they view it as it really is a system of transparency. I remember several conversations with employees of our customers, and I remember the one young man, he was probably 20 years old, and he held up his phone and he was showing me, he was just so happy. I didn't expect this, but he was just so elated to have time tracking. And I was like, you're my man. And he was showing me his phone. He's like, oh, look, all my hours are right here. I can request my PTO. I can see what my balances are. He was so excited about it. And, cool. So I think that for the younger employee groups, it tends, and this is what I hear from business owners too, they tend to have a little bit easier time of getting it into their company. and
Yeah.
into their organization. Not that that really matters a whole lot, but it's just what I found. But what I really recommend when bringing this in, and this can be a tricky thing when bringing time tracking in, is that the biggest thing we have to do is have a really candid conversation with the team.
Yeah.
So, like I said, when we bring time tracking in, many people will look at it as Big Brother. Time tracking. You don't trust me.
Yeah.
What did I do wrong? Did my other teammates do something wrong that now I'm suffering from it?
Yep.
And they look at it like really completely wrong. We view it as a system of transparency. And the reason I say a system of transparency is because a lot of times the employees are thinking that it's Big Brother on them, but the reality is that wage theft happens. And what wage theft is the opposite of what wage theft is the opposite of buddy punching. It's where your employer is effectively stealing from your wages.
Yeah.
Now, I have witnessed this personally, and it's a horrible thing. We've seen people trying to use our system effectively to steal from their employees. They want to configure settings in a certain particular way to where they don't receive overtime or they are docked hours. It's yes. So employers are doing the same thing. So my recommendation is, as an employer, for one, don't do that, of course. But two is introduce the system as a system of transparency. That this gives employer and employee a system of record that we can see exactly what's happening with our time, with our pay, with our schedule, and even as we are continuing to build out other tools that help with employee-employer relations,
Yeah.
they can then utilize those tools as well. But really introduce it early and introduce it properly. Have a meeting with your team, schedule it, give everybody a heads up, have a training, tell them the benefits. These are the things that you can do when bringing systems like this into place that can really help ease the onboarding of your team and really help to set their minds at ease and realize that this really is a positive thing. It's just once you get over that, you realize that it's a positive thing. So, and early, and introduce them early, and just take the time to spend with them. That's my suggestion there.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, in my opinion, with the word transparency. It's all about making everything transparent. The employees can see exactly the hours they've worked, when their time off is, when their lunch break was. They can really understand how much they're going to be paid in a pay period just by looking in the application itself. And as you were talking about the scheduling, I had never really thought about this before, but going back to my first part-time job in retail, I had to call in every Sunday to ask about my schedule for the next week. And I had to write it down on a piece of paper. And, looking back at it now, many of the time tracking tools that are on the market, including OnTheClock, have a built-in schedule where I can just pull up the app on my phone or go to the website and see exactly when I'm working for the next few weeks, which is phenomenal because I don't have to call in or talk to anyone. It makes it so much easier, and it's all transparent. It's all right there, in your pocket, right on your mobile device, which is really cool.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, the more that a organization like us can build into our system that really helps with that people stack, the better, right? If we go back to early in our conversation, we talked about businesses having dozens, sometimes hundreds of different, online tools, software tools. You choose a system like OTC where we have scheduling, time tracking, payroll, and we're building in these HR, these people functions. Choose a system like this, and you get it all in one, and you don't have to hunt around and for different systems to facilitate these different areas of your people stack. And you can get a really great deal, and everything's connected inside those accounts. So that's really nice. You're not doing API calls and hooking up one app to another and trying to worry about connectors and all that. Just buy a system that's all in one, and it works. And choose a system like us. We have great star ratings. The customers love our product. So
Awesome. So we talked about getting started as early as possible,
Hmm.
because often the honor system or the sticky note system or the texting the boss at 8 a.m. saying I'm here doesn't scale. So a lot of companies do get it. They implement it right away or with their first employee hire, but many don't, especially companies that have been around for, a number of years.
Oh yeah.
In your experience, Dean, do you find that there's some type of trigger moment often for these companies that have been around that are doing it maybe using an old school method? Is it a lawsuit? Is it an audit? Is it a bad hire or finding out that an employee is buddy punching? I mean, what have you found are the biggest trigger moments for employers to be like, we got to do something about this?
Yeah, I see a lot of times the small business owners and managers and leaders that I talk to, probably roughly half the time, maybe a little less than half the time, they will, I call them events. They'll run into an event. A really common one is that I just found out my trusted employee was stealing from me. I had a really heartbreaking one a couple years ago, where it was this woman. She ran a small insurance agency, and I think it was her sister-in-law worked there for 10 years. And she found out for 10 years her sister-in-law was stealing from her.
Jeez.
Now think about, I mean, family tensions, so yeah, so what happened is that event triggered time tracking, to bring in time
Yeah.
tracking.
Yeah.
So time theft, buddy punching, as we talk, same thing as time theft.
Hmm.
You might end up with a DOL investigation, where sometimes they do them sometimes randomly, but generally they're spawned by complaints from
Yeah.
employees.
Yep.
I found a lot of times, uh, customers of ours will end up finding out that they've been underpaying. Maybe they've been underpaying because they were in different tax brackets or something, or underpaying on PTO, or underpaying on or on overtime.
Yeah.
And that's a bit, they want to take care, they want to pay their employees right. And somebody
Right.
pointed out they weren't, so they're like, we're done with this. We're going to put a system in place, and we're going to make this right. So that would be another one. A lot of times, what I see a lot too is their CPAs and accountants will come to them and they'll ask, show me your time records. They're
Yeah.
just doing like an internal audit, and they
Yep.
realize they don't have records. And the CPA will then recommend, you really should have an automated time tracking system, preferably something with scheduling and payroll
Yeah.
involved as well.
For
So
sure.
those are kind of the three bigger events that I usually hear. The time theft, the errors in payment, and then a recommendation from somebody like a CPA. So
Yeah.
those are three pretty. There's lots of them, but those are probably the three big ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. All right, Dean, I'm going to put you on the spot here. This one wasn't in our actual meeting prep, but
Please do.
I think you'll be happy with this one or have a good answer at least. Um, the first time clock was invented by Willard Bundy in 1888. It's
Yes.
a long time ago. It's advanced quite a bit since then. Let's go on a history lesson. Started with paper timesheets, people just writing down their time clocks. Then we had mechanical punch clocks. That was the 1888 one I mentioned. Digital time clocks, so you're putting in your employee number and pressing punch in. It might be on the wall or in the employee break room of your business.
Uh-huh.
From there, biometric clocks were introduced where it's doing either facial recognition or a thumbprint, or some way to actually recognize that it's me punching in versus my buddy punching me in
Yeah.
on my behalf. So that solved a lot of the buddy punching, problem. From there, web-based time tracking, that I believe is where On the Clock kind of started, was a web-based system. And now there are many mobile apps for tracking time within businesses. What's next? What's coming next? What do you see
So
as the future of time tracking?
yeah, so that's a really good question, and I love your history of that. We actually, about 8 years ago, I did this blog about the history of time tracking, and I remember that the Bundy clock. That was the
Yep.
first one. That's what it was
Yep.
called. Yeah. Anyways, the future. I'd say there's a couple things. Uh, One thing that we hear employers wanting a lot is they just want, when their employees show up at work, they're clocked in. That they don't care how it happens. They just,
Okay.
and they don't want the employee to have to always touch a button or pull out their phone or go to a kiosk. They
Yeah.
just want them to show up. and start clocking time. So that is one thing, and we're working on that right now with geo clocking, Wi-Fi clocking, presence clocking. So there's several different technologies that we're working on right now that we will have in place by the end of the year to facilitate that. So that's probably the big one for on-premise people
Yeah.
that actually show up at a particular place.
Okay.
The second one, and this is still a little far out there and not well thought out, but in product, we've been looking at ways for remote workers. How can we automatically know like when they start working? So maybe they're
Yeah.
technology workers, they're working on a computer. So, of course, you could fire up an app and just click clock in. But we're looking at other ways to where we could detect when work is started without the big brother. We're not looking to screen monitor and
Yeah.
mouse monitor and all keyboard monitor and all that. But are there other ways that we can just detect that work has started and work is over with?
Yeah.
So whether it's some type of an automated thing or whether it's just an extremely simple method to clock in and out of jobs. So those are a couple things we're working on. We got AI, of course, trying to figure out how that all fits in. That
Yep.
could definitely be used to help detect some of these, work activities
Yep.
in a non-Big Brother way, of course. But the first one works really great for on-prem. But the second one, you did put me on the spot a little bit, Chad, and I'll give you that. That is one I can say we are working on right now in product, Steve and I.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
that's a big one. That's the next level, and yeah, we are looking to figure that out along with the rest of us. So, but
Cool.
we've got some ideas, and we're not revealing a whole lot yet. But you should see
Yeah.
some things in the next, I'd say the next 6 to 9 months. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome. So more automation, making things easier,
yeah,
faster.
exactly.
Very
But
cool.
there's something out there that there's some magic bullet that we're looking for, and it's there. I can sense it. Just haven't quite found it yet, but we will find it. I'm very, very, very sure of it.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Excited to see the future. Dean, so we've got about 5 minutes here. I have two questions left, so let's make them really quick. We'll do a rapid fire lightning round on these ones.
Send it.
You've been doing this for 20 plus years. I'm sure you had a lot of wins over the years, maybe made some mistakes over the years, or thought some things that didn't end up being a reality. What's something that you believed early on about how small businesses manage time that just turned out to be wrong after seeing it up close and talking to more business owners and maybe customers or, just individuals you're speaking to?
Yeah, I'd say that's actually a really good question, Chad. So you said early, so I'm gonna go back to the very
Yeah.
beginning, like 20 some years ago. Um, like I said, that the kitchen table story, I was not in time tracking, so I did not have that internal knowledge of somebody that worked in it for 5 or 10 years.
Yep.
I had a relatively naive concept that all small businesses wanted to use the system the same, that they just wanted a button for clock in, clock out for their employees, and they did not want different ways for their employees to track time.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, we just wrote clock in, clock out, a button. But then we started to realize that, people, this was, keep in mind, 20 years ago,
Yeah.
people wanted to use their phones. They wanted, some of our customers wanted to trust their employees to just type in their hours with
Mm.
verification, of course.
Okay.
Some wanted kiosk mode. So this is a relatively simple one, but that was probably one thing that early on that I noticed really quick. I really thought that we could just use one simple method, but
Yeah.
employers really wanted diversity. So, that's where we started building diversity and different ways you could use our product into it. And, we have quite a few methods now. And really, even your question just a minute ago about the future,
Yeah.
we're always questioning what's next, what's next, what's next, how are we going to build it? We want to
Sure.
build it before they ask for it is the goal.
Hmm.
And So yeah, that's probably my answer to my first one. We got 3 minutes left, so we can get to your second question.
All right, last question. Here we go. If you could sit down with every small business owner who is still running on an honor system or a spreadsheet or sticky notes or whatever it may be, what's one thing that you want them to understand before taking the next step to some type of digital, online, or app-based time tracking system?
That's a good one. So, honor system for time tracking, it sounds noble and it's great. I get it.
Yeah.
And yes, maybe your employees are 100% honest and entering hours, and maybe you are 100% honest in paying them. But the reality is that as you scale and as you grow, like you spoke earlier, Chad, things become much, much more difficult to bring in place. So if you have an honor system, my recommendation is that you continue to look at a system of transparency that is actually like another level higher than the honor system, because you go from honor to transparency, and that is like a higher level of honor. So you end up with a system like ours, like OnTheClock, where employees and their managers can log in, can see the same information. This is time, this is pay, this is money, this is serious. And we end up with this system of transparency that only benefits everybody. So my advice would be, honor system is great, but bring it up another level. Go to a system of transparency, which is time tracking, preferably with us on the clock.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, we can close on that, Dean. Really appreciate having you today. Thanks for the great conversation. I know I learned a lot, and hope you had a great time. So thank you so much, Dean.
Questions are always great, Chad. Always appreciate it.
Awesome. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care.
Thanks so much.